The idea of using horror to explore discrimination isn't new, but what happens when a game forces you to become the very thing you might condemn in real life, making split-second judgments about who deserves to live based on physical characteristics you can barely verify? No, I'm Not Human, released in September 2025 by Russian studio Trioskaz, presents perhaps the most uncomfortable mirror to real-world prejudice in recent memory, wrapping social commentary in a post-apocalyptic survival game where identifying the other becomes a matter of life and death. Every knock at your door presents an impossible choice between compassion and survival, between extending trust to a stranger who might be desperate for shelter or opening your home to something that wears a human face but harbors inhuman intent. What makes the experience particularly relevant for our current times is how it parallels real-world discrimination. The mechanics of checking papers, examining physical features, and deciding who belongs feel deliberately uncomfortable in their real-world parallels. The solar apocalypse that drives people from their homes serves as a metaphor for any crisis that creates refugees and outsiders, while the government's daily broadcasts of supposed identifying traits mirror the way prejudice gets institutionalized through official channels that claim scientific authority. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And with all that out of the way, my name's Wick, and today we're going to examine how No, I'm Not Human explores discrimination. The game opens with a last day of normalcy, complete with a cheery version of the recurring musical theme and shots of the beach, as your neighbor calls to promise he'll drop by later that night. But this peaceful facade quickly crumbles as solar activity begins dramatically increasing, triggering catastrophic global warming that renders daytime lethal. The sun becomes so intense that simply looking outside can burn your eyes from their sockets, and the streets fill with charred corpses twisted into positions of agony, forcing society to adopt a nocturnal lifestyle where darkness becomes the only refuge from the burning light above. Yet darkness brings its own terrors in the form of visitors, hostile beings who reportedly emerge from underground and use human appearances to gain the trust of victims before killing them. The name itself carries loaded implications, establishing them as outsiders, intruders, beings who don't belong in the world above. The government responds through FEMA, which immediately frames these creatures as a threat requiring identification and elimination, broadcasting daily updates about physical traits that supposedly distinguish visitors from real humans. These traits are circumstantial in nature: flawless teeth, dirty fingernails, bloodshot eyes, characteristics that could easily apply to anyone depending on their circumstances, yet they become markers of otherness that justify violence. What makes the identification process particularly tragic is that most visitors aren't even aware they are visitors, and those who become aware of their nature often react with violence or desperate rejection of this fact. The game establishes from its opening moments that you're being asked to make life and death decisions based on superficial, physical characteristics broadcast by authorities who may not fully understand what they're dealing with. You are an unnamed man, living alone in a house inherited from your father, with whom you had a difficult relationship. A detail revealed through scattered photographs and conversations that suggest you chose not to be part of your family. The house contains remnants of a different life, pictures of a woman and a cat lying on furniture in the main hallway, possibly a spouse and pet from a time when isolation wasn't your defining characteristic. Your house becomes the sole location where the entire game takes place, a claustrophobic setting divided into a hallway and 6 rooms where guests will take refuge. The windows that once offered views of your neighbor's farm and the fields beyond now serve as observation posts for watching society collapse, emergency workers removing bodies, FEMA soldiers patrolling, and eventually the appearance of something far more sinister. Radio and TV becomes your primary connection to the outside world. The TV broadcasts pro-FEMA propaganda, while independent radio voices expose their atrocities, shooting quarantine escapees, mysterious experiments, and eventually a military coup, creating cognitive dissonance as you distrust the organization, yet still religiously follow their broadcast identification criteria for visitors. This selective skepticism reveals how discrimination systems exploit desperation. You may recognize FEMA as corrupt and dangerous, but when survival depends on identifying threats, you'll accept their authority on who deserves to be marked as inhuman, becoming complicit in the very system you know is lying to you. Your isolation ends when your neighbor arrives on the first night, warning you to start taking precautions, specifically that you must allow people seeking shelter from the daytime heat to stay in your house, as visitors seem to only attack isolated individuals rather than groups. When you ask why you should let strangers into your house, your neighbor explains the core mechanic. You must always let others know you're not alone, and you'll need to check everyone for signs of being visitors, though doing so will drain your energy. His arrival establishes the game's central tension between self-preservation through isolation and survival through calculated trust. The first night brings a sequence of visitors. Your neighbor stays in the kitchen, followed by the arrival of the tall man and potentially other randomized guests. Since most encounters in the game are randomized, I'll describe them as they appeared in my playthrough, though your experience may differ. The tall man serves as a safe introduction to the game's mechanics, being one of the guaranteed humans you can trust. Yet his abrasive personality and philosophical questioning immediately challenge your assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't. Now you've established the routine that will define your survival. Morning broadcasts, teaching you new ways to identify outsiders, invasive physical examinations of your guests, and nightly decisions about who deserves shelter based on incomplete information and government-sanctioned prejudice. The television broadcast on day 2 reveals your first visitor identification sign, perfect white teeth, justified by the logic that in a post-apocalyptic world without dentistry, nobody should have Hollywood smiles. This first trait establishes the absurdity of the identification system. Perfect dental work becomes grounds for execution, transforming a sign of health and prosperity into a death sentence. When you start to examine teeth on day 2, draining 1 energy bar in the process, you begin the pattern of invasive physical inspection that will define your interactions with every guest. Day 3's television broadcast reveals dirty fingernails as the second visitor sign, with the explanation that visitors supposedly crawl up from underground, leaving dirt and grime caked deep under their fingernails from digging themselves out of the ground. This trait discriminates against manual laborers or even your gardening granny. Anyone whose work involves getting their hands dirty immediately becomes a suspect. The 4 Rest delivery service advertises on television, providing a phone number you must use to order supplies. The radio provides additional emergency broadcasts that must be tuned by rotating the knob until the garbled message clears. During daytime, an energy bar tracks how many signs can be inspected each day, with various consumables affecting this resource. Some restore energy for additional checks, while others deplete it to end the day early. After each examination, you're prompted to either kill the guest with a shotgun or listen to them explain why they show a visitor trait. But these explanations often reveal perfectly reasonable circumstances that the government's broad criteria fail to account for. For one lady with perfect teeth, she states that she just had her teeth fixed, but also suspiciously states that she can't remember much about the procedure, leaving you to wonder if she is a bad liar or just feeling her life in your hands. You may choose to shoot, and if you do, you realize her body doesn't get bagged up, leading one to believe she was in fact a visitor. The game twists the knife further. Examining yourself in the mirror costs the same precious energy as checking guests, so most players go days without self-inspection, judging and executing others while never confirming whether they themselves would pass the very test they're administering. When you finally spend the energy to look, you might discover you've been showing visitor signs all along. Yet here you are deciding who's human enough to live, a hypocrite playing executioner while potentially being exactly what you claim to fear. The intruder arrives on night 3 as the first visitor. He wears nothing but low, dark pants with pale skin, broad shoulders, freakishly long, skinny arms, and an eerie grin showing perfectly white teeth, with the protagonist noting strange folds in his skin and that his skin appears too big for him. According to a story from the Bearded Guy, the intruder was once a regular human who frantically knocked on his door begging to be let inside, described as looking pale as if he had seen death itself. After being refused and threatened with a rifle when he tried to break in, he returned the next day transformed, taller, half naked with sagged skin, easily snapping the rifle in half with his bare hands. This origin story suggests that visitors might be created through trauma and rejection, that the very act of excluding someone from safety can transform them into the monster you feared they were, a self-fulfilling prophecy where discrimination creates its own justification. He asks a critical question: are you alone? If you answer, yes, I'm alone, or if you actually are alone in the house, he kills you instantly, resulting in the yes, I'm alone ending.
Even days later, the house remains empty. Everyone avoids it like a dark omen. More rumors swirl than the number of those who ever called it home. The house, just like the final traces of its owner, has been lost to time. No relatives ever come to collect what was left behind. The homeowner simply vanished as if they had never existed at all. Everything that belonged to them is lost, worn away, or forgotten. Why do people disappear so completely? Once death finds you, the proof you ever existed begins to fade almost immediately. Belongings, creations, thoughts, memories, emotions, all dissolve into the void. There is no more you, only nothingness. As if you were never a part of this world to begin with.
If you have people residing in your home and tell him so, he stops smiling and ominously says, "You're lucky tonight," noting that he can hear people whispering in the house before leaving with the warning, "Who knows what will happen tomorrow." This encounter establishes the game's core punishment mechanism. Extreme isolation and paranoia become death sentences, forcing you to take calculated risks by sheltering potential visitors to avoid certain death from the intruder. Day 4's visitor identification trait, Bloodshot Eyes, lands on what the game deliberately marks as Conjunctivitis Awareness Day, a brilliant piece of dark irony that exposes the identification system's fatal flaw. Here's a common medical condition that millions of humans suffer from, especially during times of stress and poor hygiene, yet the government broadcasts it as definitive proof of inhuman infiltration. The game forces you to potentially execute someone for having pink eye, a minor infection that would normally warrant eye drops, not death, perfectly demonstrating how discrimination weaponizes ordinary human vulnerabilities into evidence of otherness. You now get the first appearance of the FEMA agent, who arrives wearing a yellow, open-face hazmat suit with a PMK2 gas mask, announcing he's been sent to collect test subjects for government research on visitors. You have no choice in the matter. The agent will forcibly take one of your guests regardless of whether they're human or visitor, and the game's cruelty becomes apparent when you realize the consequence of your earlier violence. If you've already executed a suspected visitor, the agent ignores the corpse and instead drags away someone very much alive, someone you might have spent days protecting. Rather than taking the obvious choice of an already dead body you've confirmed as inhuman, they insist on a living person, suggesting the government's evacuation might be something far worse than the execution you've already committed. This forced extraction introduces the concept of sacrificial selection, though you won't receive FEMA notice slips until later encounters. Hope briefly appears on the 4th night as you witness FEMA talking with your neighbor, emergency workers removing bodies, and armed soldiers providing security in the streets, suggesting that order might be restored through institutional authority. The television reveals that FEMA has become the interim government, confirming the complete militarization of society under the guise of emergency management. Later on, night 4, everything that seems stable collapses. The entire contingent of soldiers lies dead outside your window, and your neighbor's house is on fire, with the intruder visible holding a decapitated head. This massacre occurs the same day FEMA shows force, proving that institutional authority cannot protect against whatever the intruder represents. Then the neighbor's daughter arrives at your door. Her father has been killed by visitors and she's scared, seeking shelter as a newly orphaned child. The rapid transition from seeing your neighbor alive to his daughter arriving as an orphan demonstrates how quickly the situation deteriorates. She's confirmed to always be human and safe to let in. Day 5's television broadcast reveals hairless armpits as the fourth visitor identification sign, with the explanation that visitors lack body hair. The escalation of identification criteria becomes increasingly invasive, moving from external features like teeth and nails to requiring guests to expose intimate parts of their bodies for inspection. Undetected visitors kill your guests while you sleep. You wake to find corpses of people you promised shelter, people who trusted you for protection, now dead because you guessed wrong. The FEMA agent returns on the 5th night, still maintaining professionalism but gaining an attitude toward you during the encounter, taking another person before leaving. You receive your first FEMA notice during the second encounter with the officer, which is a document that allows you to select who gets sent to quarantine. On day 6, there aren't any new arrivals, which is concerning because FEMA keeps taking people from your house. Instead, you look out the peephole and just see the city burning down. The Mushroom Man only appears after completing the game at least once, first showing up on night 6 of subsequent playthroughs offering a Book of Smiles page. He's a mystical figure who speaks of mushroom festivals and mycelium networks, offering an escape route that diverges from the identification system's logic. His path requires you to find and consume a mushroom from your basement on day 7, then eat an apple from the hall shelf on day 8, following instructions that feel more like a cult ritual than survival strategy. Day 7 brings more checks, judgments, and people looking for a place to stay. The burnt firefighter arrives, providing another FEMA notice if you let him in. The FEMA notices force calculated decisions about who's expendable, as you might mark someone you're uncertain about just to prevent FEMA from randomly taking someone you know is human or consider valuable. This mechanic transforms you from executioner into administrator of disappearance, making the violence feel more bureaucratic and humane while ultimately serving the same discriminatory purpose. You're still choosing who vanishes based on suspicion and superficial traits, just with paperwork instead of a shotgun. Day 8's television broadcast announces bugs in ears as a possible visitor sign. On the 8th night, the FEMA agent returns acting less professional with a discourteous mood when talking to you, showing tones of desperation as he talks about needing more people. And unlike previous encounters, he now takes 2 occupants from the house. The agent's desperation suggests whatever happens in quarantine zones requires a constant supply of bodies, whether for experimentation, execution, or something worse. The cult leader shows up and he pushes 3 of his cultists into your home and asks that you take care of them. He threatens to burn your house down if you refuse, though this proves to be an empty threat if the cultists die. The cultists are creepy but confirmed to never be visitors, making them paradoxically safer than many seemingly normal guests. The cultists worship death itself, viewing the apocalypse as a divine cleansing rather than a catastrophe. Their presence introduces an ideological challenge to survival itself, questioning whether preserving life in this collapsed world is even worthwhile. During your conversations, you discover the cultists believe death is underneath everything. The vigilante arrives and tells us he is on the hunt for visitors. He wears necklaces made of human fingers, ears, and teeth, trophies from those he's executed, making him into exactly the kind of monster the system was supposedly designed to protect against. He will not be a guest in your house since he is on a mission. Day 9's television broadcast reveals bleeding gums as a visitor identification sign. The intruder comes back, but this time to play games. He tells you that you will gamble whether he comes in or not. If you have 2 or more visitors in your house, the humans will rebel against you, kick you out, and then you will be alone and the intruder will kill you. One of the rarest events involves a mysterious woman called the Seductive Woman, who may be the visitor version of the protagonist's deceased wife. She can spawn as early as day 4 and as late as day 9, and she stays in your bedroom, appears pregnant only at night, and following specific interaction patterns with curtains, ceiling fans, and windows after she gives birth and passes away, triggers a unique ending called the Child of Doom. The potential return of your dead wife as a pregnant visitor who gives birth and dies suggests that grief and trauma can manifest as the very threats we fear, making us unable to distinguish between love returning and danger arriving.
A choking fog smothers the world, swallowing every sound. Its silence envelops the world like cotton. It sounds like people are whispering. You call out, but the air falls still. Is meeting them a good omen? Or are they harbingers of disaster? The child stirs in their arms. It can no longer bring light into this world. At least, you don't think it can. Is it our salvation or damnation? Panic grips you. The three of them yank the child in opposite directions. You raise your gun and fire blindly, somewhere, anywhere.
Day 10's television broadcast reveals skin irritation as a visitor identification sign. On night 10, if you've successfully completed the Mushroom Man's requirements, he returns saying the mycelium has gone cuckoo and that the only solution is to journey to Mushroom Land. When he asks if you're ready to accompany him there, accepting triggers an ending where a gigantic mushroom grows in the center of town, inviting residents to a new kind of cosmic horror. The Mushroom Man represents an alternative to both government authority and violent individualism. The only escape from discriminatory reality might be mass delusion, choosing collective madness over the individual madness of trying to determine who's human.
The bigger the mushrooms, the more clumps of malice gather in the mycelium. Why, the cap could cover the whole earth. Until there's nothing left. And now, dear boy, the mycelium must find a way to unleash all that rage. Fiddlesticks. Our ritual was supposed to calm it down. The apple seeds were meant to remind it of the bond between humans and mushrooms. But it seems the mycelium's gone cuckoo now, blinded by the fury trapped within its threads. Mushroom Land is out there somewhere. Quickly, my dear boy. We have to stop the mycelium before the mushroom grows too large. Follow me. Lickety-split. Underground we go. Fiddlesticks. Looks like we're too late, my dear boy. Well, alrighty then. Say, you still got some of that kombucha.
The FEMA agent appears for the final time on night 10, completely shedding any sense of professionalism and getting straight to the point about taking people. He will extract 2 more occupants before departing. The complete breakdown of protocol, with different agents each time who have no memory of previous visits, reveals an organization in terminal collapse, mindlessly following procedures even as their purpose has been forgotten or abandoned. If you've protected all 3 cultists, the cult leader returns on night 10 to check on them. If they're all alive, he'll come back the next day to offer you salvation. This all-or-nothing requirement forces you to choose whom to sacrifice to FEMA to protect death worshippers, inverting normal moral calculations about whose life has value. The vigilante comes back demanding to inspect you for visitor signs. If you show him your armpits or hands, as long as you've cleaned them, he'll back off, but if you fail to wash up, then he'll shoot you dead immediately. If you get shot by him, then ironically you become him, roaming the night killing armed people, demonstrating how violence against violent systems often just reproduces the same violence with different targets.
You hear his shallow wheezing. Bastard, he got me. And how many more has he slaughtered? How many has he burned? Thought he'd drag it out since I didn't go down easy. But what about the others? He's gone quiet. You should probably check he's actually. Because of scum like you, so many are dead. People like you killed my friend. And people like you will never let anybody live in peace. What, you think no one will fight back? I'll crush you. I've already lost everything, but you still have something left to lose. Minds damned by insanity. I'll drive you deep into the ground. I'll drown everything in your blood. Every bastard with a weapon in their hands dies today. Every last one.
To survive this encounter, don't show your teeth unless you have discolored them with cigarettes from the ad, or don't show your eyes if you've been drinking energy drinks or coffee. Definitely don't show him your ears, as he doesn't accept this as a true sign. Day 11's television broadcast reveals fungal growth in the armpit area as a visitor sign. If you've successfully protected all 3 cultists from FEMA and other threats, the cult leader returns on night 11 to offer you salvation in death. He performs a final check on his followers, and if they're all alive, he congratulates you before extending his invitation to join them.
Fear and corruption of her word kept us from her embrace. Not to pass into nothingness, but to return into death. We surrender our bodies unto death's embrace, to find peace in what lies beyond. Long ago, this knowledge dwelled upon the earth, but the great extinction claimed more than lives alone. But now we walk the path in the ways of old. She shall cradle us all. None shall be forsaken. Even death herself shall ascend. Do you feel it? She is here. A voice echoes in the air, its owner unclear. You appeared from nowhere, drawing eyes upon yourself. We must act now. Some doors are best left closed. Come, I will hide you. I shall return you to where you were always meant to be. I will grant you peace, just as humanity has always longed for. You were never meant to survive the madness of the cosmos. I will preserve your memory.
Day 12 announces rapid pupil movement as the final regular visitor sign, a trait so subtle and subjective that it becomes nearly impossible to verify. The progression from external traits like teeth and nails to internal signs like pupil movement represents the identification system's final collapse into pure paranoia, where any micro-expression becomes potential evidence. The vigilante makes his final appearance on night 12, acting more aggressive and hostile than before, demanding another sign to prove you're not a visitor. He reveals that your neighbor was his brother, whom he believes didn't man up enough to protect his family. The television on day 12 reveals that FEMA has enacted a coup d'etat and taken control of everything, while the radio reports that some sort of subject has escaped from their grasp. The military coup represents the final transformation of emergency management into totalitarian control, with FEMA no longer pretending to serve civilian government but openly ruling through force. The escaped subject could be a visitor, a human test subject, or perhaps the distinction no longer matters in a world where everyone is both prisoner and potential threat. During night 12, after the vigilantes test, various randomized guests arrive for the last time before the final day. These final visitors represent the last remnants of outside society seeking shelter before the complete collapse, each one a potential threat or potential victim, their fate determined by your increasingly arbitrary decisions based on signs that have lost all meaning. On day 13, you perform your final checks, deciding whether to execute remaining guests based on whatever signs you still believe matter. There's no new broadcast, no new identification criteria, just you and your accumulated paranoia making final judgments. Day 14 arrives as a scripted sequence. All you can do is approach the windows in the main corridor and board them up one by one. Each window you seal represents another connection to the outside world severed, another acknowledgement that whatever exists beyond your walls has become permanently uninhabitable. The game performs its final check on day 14, evaluating who remains in your house at the exact moment before boarding up. This determines which ending you receive. If only humans remain, you achieve the end ? Boarding up windows with genuine human companions. You and your fellow survivors move to the basement, descending underground to the very place from which visitors supposedly emerged, completing an ironic circle where those fleeing the monsters must inhabit the monster's domain to survive. The protagonist realizes they must continue living with uncertainty about when death will actually come. The question mark in the title suggests that survival itself is uncertain. You've created a sealed environment with people you believe are human, but the identification system's unreliability means you can never truly know.
Some hope the sun will finally burn the ground to ash or fade into darkness. Others seek the end on their own terms. Dragging out the inevitable is more painful than a swift end. No one envies the living. One day, you catch an announcement on the radio. Solar activity is fading. Scientists predict that in a couple of days will be safe to go outside during daylight hours in a few days' time. You feel disappointment? You realize you'll live through this year after all. But then what? Will next summer be the last? The thought of waiting for the end is a suffocating burden. But at least one of the others seems happy. Who knows? Maybe there's still a decade left ahead of you.
If at least one visitor remains among your survivors, you receive the "No, I'm not alone" ending. Paranoia spreads as the group counts days on brick walls, and you're eventually taken in the night by visitors.
It wasn't just humans you let into your home. They tear you apart. Darkness floods your vision. Pain sears through your body. A small, lonely house takes shape in your mind. You hope it will be over soon. It's hard to hold on to. The pain fades as you slip further away. Welcome me.
If you're completely alone, having killed or expelled everyone, the outcome remains the same as having only humans, suggesting that total isolation and successful discrimination lead to identical ends. If paranoia completely consumes you and you kill too many people, especially innocents, you trigger the "yes, I'm a murderer" ending. Either the prophet arrives to judge your descent into madness, or remaining guests force you from the house fearing you'll turn the shotgun on them next, resulting in your death under the scorching sun.
I'm truly sorry. They threw you out into the street. Unarmed, bloodied. You have no strength left to crawl away from the sunlight. No way to end your suffering on your own terms. You'll burn slowly. And there's no one left to blame.
The various faction endings bypass this sequence entirely, joining the cult, following the Mushroom Man, being recruited by FEMA, or digging through the basement to meet death itself, all represent escapes from the choice between contaminated and pure survival. These alternative endings suggest that the only way to avoid the identification system's false choice between complicity and death is to reject its framework entirely, choosing madness, transcendence, or collaboration with the very forces you were meant to resist. The title, No, I'm Not Human, ultimately refers not to the visitors but to what systematic discrimination does to everyone involved. The discriminators lose their humanity through the violence they commit. The discriminated lose theirs through being reduced to a collection of physical traits to be examined and judged. The system transforms everyone into something less than human, either monsters or potential monsters, executioners or victims, with no space for genuine human connection. The game's masterstroke lies in making you the active agent of discrimination. You're not watching a character make these choices. You're the one examining armpits, checking teeth for imperfections, deciding who deserves death based on arbitrary physical characteristics. The energy system becomes a metaphor for how discrimination operates in reality. We never have complete information, yet we make irreversible judgments anyway. In our world, we may not check for perfect teeth or hairless armpits, but we have our own arbitrary markers of otherness. We have our own FEMAs extracting people for testing, our own vigilantes dispensing violent justice, our own broadcasts teaching us to identify threats based on superficial characteristics. The game asks us to recognize these systems for what they are, mechanisms that create the very monsters they claim to fight, that transform ordinary people into willing participants in atrocity through the simple promise of safety. The horror of "No, I'm not human" isn't the visitors. It's the recognition of ourselves in the protagonist, boarding up windows after 2 weeks of examinations and executions, descending into a basement to hide from a world we helped destroy, never knowing if we saved humanity or simply became the newest monsters in an endless cycle of fear and violence. The game leaves us with a question that haunts long after the credits roll. In a world that demands you discriminate to survive, is survival worth the cost of becoming a discriminator?